All right. So now for implementing custom authentication authorization in Blazor standalone WebAssembly application, I have a video on my channel. So I'm going to drop link of that video in the description box. So I would recommend you guys to check that video out first so that you'll understand what we are doing in here. I will not go uh, in much deep in this current video because here we are just creating this project. So I'll implement everything, but I'll not go in deep. So if you want to understand how these things are working, why we need to do certain things a certain way, I would recommend you to check that video out. All right. So here, first thing, we need to have one NuGet package installed. So that NuGet package is for enabling authentication in Blazor WebAssembly application. We'll say manage NuGet packages, and this should be Microsoft ASP.NET Core, Microsoft ASP.NET Core. I don't know how to make this thing bigger. ASP.NET Core WebAssembly dot author. Yeah. Microsoft ASP.NET Core component WebAssembly dev server components. Okay, Microsoft ASP.NET Core components authentication, or is it authorization? Authorization, not WebAssembly. Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Authorization. Okay, let's install this. Apply. I accept. There is some error in login.razor. What is it? There's no error. This is false error from this, and we can see this is installed. So we are good. Now that is installed. So that package gives us one class, that is authentication state provider. Authentication state provider. This comes from Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Authorization. So this is the main class which will provide authentication authorization functionality to our Blazor WebAssembly application. And this is an abstract class. Okay, so in order to use any abstract class, we need to derive from this class, provide body for the abstract methods. So we have this one abstract method here, this event, and all these things. I have already talked about this in detail in that video. All right. So here what I am going to do, I am going to create a folder here. I'll name it auth only. Inside this, we are going to have our own authentication state provider. So I'll name it quiz auth state provider.cs. And this is going to be a subclass of authentication state provider. Authentication state provider. Okay, we need to implement it. We'll implement it. Get authentication state async. This is the method which we need to provide body for. All right. So this needs a task of authentication state. Okay. So what we can do is we can simply have a private, this type of variable basically. And here we'll say private read only authentication task of authentication state. We'll say auth state task. Okay. And then we are going to have its constructor. And inside this constructor, we are going to provide a body for default body for this auth state task. Okay. So this default body will be, maybe we can say var for authentication state. This needs one claims identity. For claims principal. For claims principal, we need claims identity. Okay. So here, what we'll do, we'll simply say var identity equals new claims identity. Okay. Now we'll have one claims principal. It will be new claims principal of this identity. Okay. And then we'll have authentication state. This auth state equals new authentication state, and inside this we can pass this principal. And after that we can set this underscore auth task to this task dot from result this auth state, this thing. So we have added default value for this auth state task, and this task of authentication state, this thing, it should actually return this auth state task. And now we are good. The default implementation, this is fine here. So this is default. Now on our login page, let me pin this login page and this thing. Right now we are going to work on these two files only. So after logging in, we want to set this login token in some storage, and then we want to implement auth state provider. So we need to provide the auth response to this quiz auth state provider. Okay. So in this quiz auth state provider, what I will do, I will simply have a public async task login async method. Okay. And in here, we can have our, do we have our logged in user? Share DTO, login DTO, user role, auth response DTO. We had our auth response DTO, right? And inside this token, what all things we had? Token services, auth service. So in token, we had name, ID, name, and role. Okay. So we need these three things. So let's create a type, let's say logged in user, in our shared project. I'm going to create a logged in user type here. I'll say logged in user, which can be a record. So public record, and we are going to have those three things: int ID, string name, and string role. Okay, now we are good with this thing. Now, when we are returning our auth response DTO from our API, from our auth service, we are returning this auth response DTO, which right now has token error message. So inside this, let's add that logged in user as well. Or maybe let's do this. Instead of having this token outside, let's have it as a property of this logged in user only. The string token. Okay. Now from this auth response DTO, instead of string token, we'll say logged in user, user, and then string error message. Okay. Now we'll modify all the occurrences. First, we have this auth response DTO. Here we have this JWT. Here we'll generate our logged in user object equals new. We are in API's auth service. New logged in user, logged in user. We need to provide ID, which we should have from this user. So user.id, user.name, user.role, and this JWT. And from this auth response DTO, we can directly pass this logged in user. All right. Now let's go to the login.razor page. Not login.razor, the iAuth API. Oh, here also we should be good. Yeah, All right, we should be good now. So when we are getting this auth response DTO, we'll get auth response DTO, and from here we will have logged in user. So here we could say var logged in user equals, this should be auth response dot user. This is actually logged in user. Now let's go to quiz auth state provider. Here in this login async, we'll have, or let's say set login async. We are setting the login. So logged in user, which will come from our shared, and we'll have this user. Okay. In here, let's have one property as well in this quiz auth state provider to access the currently logged in user. It will be of type logged in user. We'll name it user. And maybe let's have a helper property of type bool is logged in, which will be a computed property. Here we'll check if user is not equals null and user.id is greater than 0. So we'll, at least we can see user.id is greater than 0. Correctly like this question mark to handle the null case. And for this user, we will make this setter as private so that it can't be set from outside of this class. Right? When we are saying set login async, here what we need to do, we need to save the user details in some storage, because if we refresh the page, we don't want user to log in again. We want to persist the current logged in state or current state. So for this, we will have a storage service, or maybe right now we can directly have it here only. So in this quiz auth state provider, for browser, we are right now working in browser. So in browser, the storage is local storage or session storage. Okay. So we wanted to persist. So we'll use local storage here. And in order to access the local storage or session storage, these are browser APIs. So we need JavaScript interrupt for this. So here in this quiz auth state provider, I'm going to inject IJS runtime. Let's call it JS runtime. And we will modify this thing when we'll work on the mobile app, because there we are not going to use this local storage session storage. At that time we will use the device storage preferences most probably. So in that case we are going to extract out this storage service, but that we'll do later. Right now let's try to complete this thing. So we have IJS runtime, this underscore JS runtime, we have this. Now when we are setting this login, here we are going to say await underscore JS runtime dot, here we'll say invoke void async, and we are going to use local storage dot set item. This is a method on JavaScript to store the key value pair in local storage. Then we need to provide the value. So for the value, what we can do, we can go to this logged in user, and inside this we can have a method where we'll say public string. I'm going to have this toJSON method. Here we'll simply say JSON serializer dot serialize this. Now here we can simply say what we are saving in this local storage. We are saving this user dot toJSON, this thing. We saved this. After saving, we need to set this user as well, this logged in user. Here we'll say user equals user, or maybe we'll do this thing first. Then we'll save it in the local storage. Now we have modified the current auth state. If we check the initially, we have this default auth state task, and then we, from this get authentication state async, we are actually calling this auth state task. But now, because we are setting the login after initialization, that means we are modifying the current auth state. So in that case, we need to modify this thing. That means we need to modify this underscore auth state task. So this should be a new one, because right now it will not have this default empty identity, empty principal, empty auth state. it will have values now from this logged in user. Okay, so for this thing we are going to set couple of things here. First, here we'll create our identity again. So we'll say new claims identity. Inside this we can provide couple of different things, and out of these, one is list of claims and then authentication type. This type is required, and these are claims if whatever claims we want to have. Not required in this case, this is nullable type, but we need to have it so that Blazor can successfully let's say get the current identity. So we first thing we need to have the list of claims. So all the claims from this logged in user. On this logged in user only, I'm going to create one more method, helper method. I'll say var claims array. Okay, and here I can say two claims. Okay, and from this we are going to return an array, and this would be new claim. First we need, let's go to the API auth service. Here we know we have these three claims which we are setting, so we are going to use these only. First thing, name identifier, we are good. So here we have this ID, not user ID, so we'll have just ID. Second thing, name, we'll have just name. Role, we'll have just role. For token also, we can have it as a claim on UI side. This is not in API side, but on UI side we can have it. Let's do this. For token, we don't have anything claim type, so for this we can simply have name of token and just token. Save it, and now we have this list of claims. All right. Now in our back to our quiz auth state provider, here we have identity, claims identity. Here we can say user dot to claims. Now we have a claims list. Inside this claims list, after that we need to provide authentication type. So let's have a private const here, private const string. We'll say auth type, and we can name it whatever we want, quiz auth. Let's use this auth type with this identity. All right. After that, we'll follow the same process, principal, auth state, and this thing. Now this is complaining because underscore auth state task, this is actually read only. So we don't need it as read only in our case, because we are setting it outside of the constructor as well. We are setting it here. And with this, our auth state task is also done. Okay. After this, we can use a notify authentication state changed method to notify that something has changed. We are not handling anything for this because from this we are directly passing this, but it is good so that if framework calls this, it will have, or maybe framework can know then this auth state has been changed, so it can recall this method, re-execute this method. It will have the latest auth state task. So in this we need to provide task of this thing, so we'll say simple auth state task again, and we are good. Okay, set login async, this is fine. Now let's quickly create a method for logout as well. We'll say public async task set logout async. Okay, in this case we'll simply say user equals default, or let's say user is null. We are setting user to explicitly null. After that we'll simply remove this user, and we have one problem here. With this local storage dot set item, it needs a key value pair. So key of this item, we have directly provided value, but we didn't provide any key. So for the key, let's have a constant private const string, let's say user data key. Now it could be anything. Let's say I'm calling it u data. So user data key, when we are setting the item, we'll say user data key, then user dot to JSON value. And when we are removing it, so the method is local storage dot remove item, and we need to provide the key, the user data key. We removed this. Now after this, we need to reset this identity using the same thing which we are doing in our constructor. So we are repeating this thing again and again, right? It's better to extract this out in a separate method. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to have a method here, private void, and I say set auth state task. Okay, and here I am simply going to check if is logged in. If this is logged in, then we'll use this set login async logic, this thing. Okay, if that's not the case, here we need user.to claims. So this user.to claims, we can have uppercase user because that user we already have. Now if that's not the case, then we'll use the default thing which we have in our constructor. So we'll simply cut this thing from our constructor and we'll add it in this else case. And now we are good. We have set this auth state task in both the cases. Now we can call this method from constructor, set auth state task, and then inside this set login, we'll say set auth state task. And then in logout also, after setting user to null, removing this thing, or maybe before removing this thing, we'll say set auth state task and notify this thing, and then remove it from local storage. Same thing we'll save in local storage at the very end. Now we are good. Our login and logout methods are ready. We are setting it default. Looks like we are good with this setup. We'll see if anything extra is required, but right now it looks fine. Now how this authentication state provider works, it will be injected by default by the system, by the framework. So we need to tell it whenever you are using authentication state provider, you should use this quiz auth state provider as an implementation. Okay, and when we are going to access direct user details in any of the component, we can directly inject this as well. So we will mostly use this quiz auth state provider. There is one more way by we can use this auth state provider using this a task of authentication state. We can actually have this, so it will be provided by the Blazor framework as an cascading parameter, so we can use this as well. In our case is simple. We are directly going to inject this quiz auth state provider, and we can directly get access to this user details, and we can directly check if this current user is logged in or not using these things. All right, the point is we need to register this quiz auth state provider and authentication state provider in our DI. So we'll go to program.cs. In here, first thing we'll say builder.services.add singleton. We'll have our quiz auth state provider registered. After that, we'll say builder.services.add singleton. Here we will register authentication state provider. Now for this, we want the implementation, this one. Now if we do this thing, this might have looked good, but the problem will be now for quiz auth state provider, we are going to have two different instances. One, when we are saying add singleton with this default, which we will use, and whenever framework will use, it will inject this, use this as an implementation of this. It will be a different instance, but we need this same instance because we will be setting the login details or logout details directly on this instance because we are going to inject this. So whenever framework try to use this authentication state provider, it should get the same instance. So for this, we are going to use a different type of registration with this add singleton. So we will not directly provide this type. Inside this method, we have this thing authentication state provider. We can provide the implementation instance, or we can use this func delegate. It gets a iService provider as a parameter and returns authentication state provider as output. So here we'll have SP, which is service provider. We'll say from this SP just get a required service of type quiz or state provider. And now with this setup, in first line we are saying that we are registering it. For second line we are saying whenever you need authentication state provider, come here from the service provider, try to get the required service of this quiz state provider. That means you should try to get this implementation of or instance of quiz auth state provider from the DI itself, and it will get from the DI which we have already registered. So it will use the same instance, and now we'll be good with this setup. Okay. Now to provide this authentication state provider throughout our application, we need to have builder dot services dot add cascading authentication state, and after all these we'll simply enable authorization. So for this we'll say builder dot services dot add authorization core, and using this we are good. We have implemented this thing. Now we just need to test it out. Okay. So first we need to set the login. So we are going to inject this quiz auth state provider in our login.razor page. So here let's inject this. Inject quiz auth state provider. I'll name it quiz auth state provider only. And after successfully logging in, before navigating to the home page, here I'll say quiz auth state provider dot set login async, and I need to provide this user, which is this logged in user, and we need to await it. And with this setup we are good. It will set the login state and then navigate to the home page / page. Now in order to check it, we can directly inject it. Let's go to the home page. On home page, what I will do, first thing, I'll simply inject the same quiz auth state provider, and we are going to use it at multiple pages. So let's move it to the underscore imports.razor. Save, and now we should be good. Now in quiz auth state provider, from this we can access anything in the code. So here we'll say instead of hello world, let's do this. We'll say quiz auth state provider dot user dot name. Okay, save it. This is one way by which we can directly use it. Then we can have a second way which we will have basically for the authorization. Maybe we will have different menu items for different roles. Okay, for students we'll have different, and for admin we'll have different rules. And for a couple of different pages as well, we'll have access to some different pages for admin, and we'll give access to student some different pages. So we'll have authorization part. For that, it gives us this Blazor gives us an authorize view component, which comes from this Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components authorization. So we're going to use this as well at multiple pages. So let's move it to imports.razor. Here we have authorize view, and in authorize view we have three different set. One is first is authorizing. When it is trying to authorize, that means how this works. This actually goes to the authentication state provider implementation of this, and it calls this thing. So it might, because this is a task, so it can execute, it can take some time. So that's why it has authorizing state. Then it has, after authorizing, it will have status. either user is authorized or not authorized. If it is not authorized, we'll have it here, and if user is authorized, then we'll have something here. So we have these three different piece. Okay, so here let's do this. Say authorizing, we will rarely see this, and on this page we are not going to see this because this home page we are navigating it after authorizing. Okay, so authorizing dot, let's do this. Not authorized, here we'll simply say not authorized, and in this authorized we'll say p authorized. Now here also we can access the user identity. So inside this authorized view we have access to a special variable that is called context. This context variable. Okay, and on this context we have access to user, and this user is different. This is claims principal. This user is different. From this user we can access all the claims or roles or anything. So on this claims we can simply say first or default, and here we can say c dot type. This is claim type, and here we'll say claim types dot name, because this is how we are setting our name claim type. On this we can say question mark dot value. Okay, authorized, and here we will use this thing. Now let's copy this thing, this authorized view, and do this. Go to login page, and on login also I am going to add it somewhere on the top so that we can see how this thing is working. Before this HR, I'm having this authorized view here. So we'll see how all these things are working out. Issue here. Cannot convert lambda to this and that. Claim types is not. Let's do this. Okay, so save everything. Now let's try to run it. Okay, we have done a lot of things here. So we'll simply check if all these things are working or not. So I'm running it. We have been typing since half an hour, right? All right. Okay, this is our API. This is our UI. And here we can see not authorized because we are not authorized on the login page. Now we'll say admin at gmail.com, password 123456, and login. After logging in, we are here. This hello Abhay Prince. This is from our injection, that inject quiz auth state provider, and this authorized this state. This comes from the authorized view. So with these two things, we can know that both of these things are working. So both of these are in sync and we can see everything. Looks like our authentication is working fine, right? Now let's try to check the application tab. Did we store or save the data? If you go here, we have this U data which has this ID, name, role, and this token. So that means it got successfully saved in the storage as well. Now we'll extend this functionality, enhance this. Now if I refresh this thing, so we have some error first. We'll see what is the error here. It is saying object reference not set to an instance of an object. Okay, we'll see what this is. And with this, we don't have any that what we call it on home page. Right now, on home page, we are directly accessing this user.name. So we will have this user question mark dot name. Okay, let's quickly refresh it, retry it. It will open up login again. Not login. Not authorized. Okay. Now we are authorized. Now if I refresh it, we are seeing not authorized. And hello, after hello, we don't have anything. If we go to the inspect, if we go to application, we have the U data still there. Okay. So what should happen when we are refreshing it or when we are coming to this application for the first time? How it should behave? It should check if we have user state saved in our local storage. If we have it here, we should initialize that local storage, saved storage. We should initialize our quiz auth state provider with that state. All right. So let's quickly do this. We'll go to our quick quiz auth state provider. In here, we are going to introduce one more method. We'll say public async task, and here we'll say initialize async. Okay. Now, because we want to check from this local storage, so let's use this thing. Await this thing here. Local storage JS runtime. So here we'll say invoke async. It is going to return something. So here we'll use, sometimes this hover effect is very bad with this Visual Studio. All right. So null label string, and here we'll use local storage dot get item method with a key. Okay, and we'll store it in some variable. So here we'll say u data, or let's say u data. Okay. Now here we will check if we got the u data. That means if we have this user state saved in our local storage or not. Here we can simply say if string dot is null or space u data, not will directly check if this is null or white space. That means this does not exist. So we'll simply return from here. We don't need to do anything. Okay, here we can simply say user data or state is not there in the browser storage. Now if we come after this if case, that means we have this user state. So here we can simply say var user equals, we'll say JSON serializer dot deserialize logged in user u data. Now we are using this here, so let's do this. Go to logged in user, and here the way we have this two JSON method, we'll have one more factory method here. So we'll say public static logged in user. Here we'll say load from JSON, string JSON. Okay. Here we'll simply say JSON serializer dot deserialize logged in user from this JSON. Okay, now it can be null here, so we can quickly check if, oh sorry, we can use ternary operator. So string dot is null or white space JSON. If this is not the case, then we'll deserialize it. If that's the case, we'll return null, and this should be nullable. Save it. Let's go back, and here we already have this check in place, so we can have it here also if we want to. But now here what we'll do, we'll say logged in user equals, or maybe just var user equals logged in user dot load from this u data. Now here again we'll check if this user is not equals null, or maybe we can check user dot id, user question mark dot id, or maybe let's do this. Let's have two checks here. So either user is equals null, or user is not null but user dot id is equals 0. So this also means the same thing. So in this case, we will simply say user data state is not maybe valid. We can say this. Now, if that is also not the case, then we know we have our user, we have u data, we have everything. From here, we just need to set user as login. So set login async and we can pass this thing. Okay. Here we'll simply say set login async and we'll pass this user. And this is going to be an awaitable method. So await it. Now we are good. Now the initialize async method is ready, but from where should we call it? So we can be on any of the page when we are refreshing it or when we are directly coming to our application. It could be any internal page. So we are not sure where it would be. We can't have it on main layout. That doesn't make sense. So what we'll do for this one, we will go to the entry point of our application. That entry point is this app.razor. This is our entry point. Okay. So here we are going to introduce code block. So this is the thing which will first going to be called or going to be executed. Okay. Before anything, it will be executed only once for lifetime of our application. Okay. So it will not be re executed. So we are good to have our logic here. So the logic we will have in our override on initialized async method. So we'll simply await it. Await what? We need to inject our this service quiz auth state provider service. So let's inject it here. I'm just having it here for the sake of this single thing, so that we can see. Okay, we have it here. You can have it anywhere. On the top is the most common one, but for this one, let's have it here only. So here we have this. We can say await quiz auth state provider dot initialization. Now this will work. This will initialize. This will initialize everything. But there is one problem with this. Not problem. This is kind of the way how Blazor works. So the on initialized async method. Pay attention, async method, not the on initialized without async. That synchronous version. So the sync methods, those works in sync. So it will come here. It will come here. It will execute it, and after coming out of this method, it will paint or render the UI. But how this on initialized async method works, it will come here. When it will hit this await, so it will start this operation and it will directly go to render the page or UI. And when this operation completes, it will again come here, complete this method, and again is going to render the UI. So the point here is to explain it the way I'm saying that when we are on this on initialize async, before this, when this call is in process, maybe it is trying to get data from this local storage. When it is awaiting the result, it is still reading the data from local storage. It can actually render a page. So if we are on home page, it can render this thing. So we will have nothing here. Will not be there. This home page. So for this, you can have maybe this is how you want to have it. That's why we have this authorized view, authorizing, not authorized thing. So this whole use case is totally depends upon you how you are implementing it. How I would implement it if it is in process of initializing. I don't want anything to be painted or anything to be rendered on the UI. So for this, what we can, there is no direct way. So we are going to simply apply some C# logic here. And that logic is going to be, I'm going to go to the layout page, main layout page. Here I'm going to have this code block. Here also I'm going to have override on initialize async method. And I will simply inject quiz auth state provider. And inside this quiz auth state provider, I'm going to have one flag, private bool, or not flag, just a property. Okay, so let's have this property with this initialize method only. Initialize method, it is here. So here I'll say public bool is initializing. Okay, and the set I'm going to have it private, and the default value I'm going to have is true. So by default it will be in initializing state. Now inside this initializing I'm going to wrap everything inside a try finally block. I'm not worried about catch. You can have if you want to handle some exception, but I'm okay with this. I will simply have try finally. Why finally? So that I can set this is initializing to false in every case. When I say every case, whether we are returning from here or here or here in default case, if everything is there. So here we'll say is initializing false. So now we have this flag. We will use this flag on our main layout. Okay. So we won't paint our body unless we have that state ready. Quiz auth state provider. Here, what we can do, we can simply say if quiz auth state provider dot is initializing, if this is in initializing phase, then we'll have some message here. We'll say initializing state, and for else case we are going to render this body. Okay, now what would happen? It will come here, it will directly going to render this page. It will check this. Initially it will be false, it will simply render this, it will never go to this body if this is still in initializing phase. After that, after initializing, it will be set, but it will not be re-triggered. Okay, so for this also we have different use cases. First is in on is this quiz auth state provider, we can have one event where we can simply say that when this is initializing state is changing, and on this main layout we can have event handler for this. Or we have one more approach, simpler one. Here we can simply say we'll have a while loop, infinite while loop, not infinite, a while loop until we have this is initializing state true. In this, we'll simply say await task.delay. We'll simply have a delay of, let's say, 500 milliseconds. Okay. Now, what would happen when it will first come to this page on initialize? It will come here. It will come here. It will set is initializing is true. Yes, it is initializing. It is not finished initializing yet. It will come here. Await task.delay. It will simply go ahead and render this main layout. And inside this, it will check this. This is initializing. This is true. So it will simply render this P initializing state message. After that, it will wait for this 500 millisecond. Then it will again execute this while loop. It will come here. It will check await task.delay, and it will again try to render this. Now, because it will be the second await, it will not by default automatically render it. So if you are familiar with this Blazor's rendering, re-rendering process, if we have multiple awaits, so when the re-render happens, first if the method is async, it will come here. When it hits the first await, it re-renders. After that, if we have multiple awaits, it will not re-render for other awaits, and it will re-render once that method finishes the execution. If we want to render it, re-render, force re-render in between, then we need to explicitly call state has changed. But that is not the case in our case. We are okay. We don't want it to re-render if this is still awaiting the initialization to be finished. So we are okay. Now it will wait for 500 milliseconds. It will come here. It will again check if is initializing finished. If it is not, it will again wait. It will keep on waiting until this is initializing flag sets to false in our quiz auth state provider. That means this process is completed. After completing, it will come here, it will complete the execution, and it will again go ahead and re-render this component. This time the is initializing state will be false. So this time it will render this body. And inside body, we will have our page. So this is how all these things is going to work. Alright. Now let's quickly try to run it and see if all this setup is working. I hope this was not complicated. For me, it's not. Okay, we are here. We are already authorized. You see? So it came there, it went to that initialize and it went ahead and did everything. In final version, we'll fix this. If we are already logged in, we will not show this login page. We will simply log out. But for now, we just want to test it. So we are good. We'll log in. We'll come here. We are here. Everything is fine. Let's try to refresh this page. It can be very quick, so we can see it is very quick. So that logic and all that, that is for rare case, if somehow it is taking some time for those cases. But right now you see, I refresh this because I have state in the local storage saved, so it was able to get the state from there. All right, cool. So we are good with our custom authentication state provider implementation, uh, saving the auth state in local storage, patching the auth state when we are refreshing our page or coming back to our app. All these custom authentication related logic is done. Now we'll see what next we are going to work on.